Hello and welcome to this video and to a new filming location. This is actually the chair we have in Eloise's nursery. She's currently asleep, so I'm grabbing this time to try and film my birth story. I have no idea how long I've got left of this nap, so we may be doing this in several parts, we'll find out. I've wanted to film this video for some time because I found them really helpful when I was pregnant. I watched a lot of them, good, bad, ugly, you know, all of that, and just found it very useful hearing other people's experiences of birth and all of that, just to give me an idea of what I was letting myself in for. To the women that actually filmed their birth, not just to sit down and talk about it, but actually physically on the day film it, I salute you, but it's not something I could ever done. So I'm afraid you're just going to have to cope with a story time from my very comfortable chair. Recommend the chair. And I'll run through the events of my birth, I guess. If you've watched any of the vlogs, certainly the last couple, obviously I kept saying we were in the waiting game. We didn't have anything booked in or anything like that, so we had no idea when she was going to come. I lost my, we're going to get a bit personal and a bit TMI here, so apologies, but I lost my mucus plug on the Friday. Well, I thought I did. I mean, now looking back, I know I did, but at the time I was like, is that the thing? Is that what they've been talking about? Did and I about telling Pete about that because I didn't want him to think that we had to go into like action stations and she was going to come, because you can lose that very early. It can grow back as well, I think I read. But I lost that on the Friday. So at that point, this would have been 6 days before my due date. I felt like it was going to be happening in the week of my due date. At what point, I didn't have a clue, but I felt like things were happening. I'd been saying, I think several times in those vlogs, that she dropped. Obviously then I lost that on the Friday. I was like, right, okay, this has happened, but let's not get ahead of ourselves, was kind of my thought on that. Saturday, again, nothing really happened. I'd lost a bit more, there was a little bit of blood in that one. Again, it was like, this has happened, Pete, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just continue as is. We went to B&Q, we bought tape so that we could paint our ensuite, which we were going to do on the Sunday. The Sunday arrived. Again, in the morning I lost a bit more, there was a little bit more blood in that sort of mucusy bit, just like very, very minor amounts, nothing to be alarmed about or anything like that. And again was like, right, don't get ahead of ourselves, all of that kind of stuff. I then went to get something out of the cupboard in our ensuite bathroom, so it was below, and I held onto the sink to pull myself back up, and as I did that I felt a trickle of water. I was like, oh, what is this? And it was like, what's that noise? I was like, well, I've just had some water or some liquid, and I'm pretty sure I didn't wee myself, because there's a sort of act to that. It's like, that was very involuntary. So I think that might have been my waters. And he was like, oh dear, what do we do? I was like, I don't know. So we ignored it. And then, like, as we were pottering about on that morning, it was like, what do we do? Like, how long do we leave it after my waters break before we're supposed to go to hospital, kind of thing? Again, we just got on with stuff. I didn't think too much of it, Pete didn't think too much of it. I then happened to lose a little bit more water at around lunchtime while I was sat down. And I was like, there is no motion to this one, I should probably check. So I went to get my maternity notes and tried to find anything about waters breaking, to find out that we were supposed to have called the triage and let them know and things like that. So I did that at that point. So that was, the first lot was at 11:30, and then the second lot was at about 1 o'clock probably. So it's not too big a gap. So I rang the number for triage, explained what happened, and they told me to come in to hospital, essentially. So we ran around just grabbing the last bits that we needed for the hospital bag, just to make sure that it was all there and in the car, just in case I had to stay. I didn't think I was going to, because I wasn't particularly contracting or anything like that at that point, but didn't want to then be told that I had to stay and then not have anything, so we just did that. I also rang my parents at that point, because my mum from the get-go said that she would come up when I went into labour. Originally she was going to come into hospital with me and be like my second birth partner, but as my pregnancy went along there wasn't really any complications with it, and the more I thought about it, the more I was like, actually no, could you stay at home with Jeff, who is our dog if you're new to this video, could you stay at home with Jeff and then just Pete as my birth partner? I thought that was probably better. I didn't really know what her role was going to be, basically, and I felt that I didn't want her to feel like a sort of spare part, whereas her looking after our dog would be a bigger help, because then she could walk him and do all of that stuff. But I rang them to say, look, I think my waters have broken, I've got to go into hospital to have some checks and things, could you make the journey? And it happened to be at the right time. So my dad is a church minister, he's a vicar in other words. He'd done his morning service, they'd just finished their dinner, he had an evening service, and he just had the right amount of time in between that to get mum to my house. They live about an hour and a half away, so they had the right amount of time to get mum to our house and then for my dad to get back to do his service that evening. So again, I imagine my mum flew around putting stuff in a bag and got in the car. So that was that bit. So we then headed into hospital. So we probably got there at about 2 o'clock at this point on the Sunday. Again, I didn't really feel like I was having any contractions at that point. But we went in, they do your normal sort of urine sample, blood pressure, all of that. I had my chat with whoever. I'd actually put on a pad at this point, I hadn't throughout the rest of the day, but just before we left for the hospital I put on a pad. After the initial sort of consultation part, I was then taken into the rooms where you have the monitoring. So I knew what was going to happen in that because we'd had that before a few weeks previously. So they hooked me up to the machine and things and checked all of the baby's heartbeat, my blood pressure, all of that kind of stuff. And then the last bit, she was like, right, I need to see your pad, basically, to make sure that there's any liquid, or I need to internally assess you. And I was like, well, literally walking over here, a load more liquid has come out, so here you go. And my pad was, again, sorry for the TMI, very wet. And she was like, yeah, I don't need to do any checks, your waters have definitely broken. So she then explained that they had to make an appointment for me for 24 hours after the initial waters breaking, so that would have been 11:30 in the morning on the Monday, because if I hadn't gone into what they call spontaneous labour, so if I wasn't contracting and if things hadn't progressed at all, then they were going to have to induce me. Now again, if you've watched any of my vlogs sort of towards the end of my pregnancy, you'll know that being induced was something I really didn't want to happen. I don't know why I had a thing against it. I think it's just because it's a synthetic hormone, so you don't get as many of the benefits, but hundreds of women do it and they're fine and they have good births and things like that. So it was a case of going, right, okay, well, if that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. I'd rather she was out safely than, you know, I was stubborn about it. So all of that took probably about 2 hours. We got back here at just after 4, where my parents had arrived maybe 10 minutes or so beforehand, explained the situation. As a sort of precaution, my mum didn't know whether she was staying or whether she was going back with my dad, but I said to her, look, even if I'm not doing it now, I'm going to have a baby within the next few days, so you may as well stay, rather than going backwards and forwards. So dad left, mum stayed, we had some dinner, and it was at that point, so it must have been at about 5:30, 6 o'clock on the Sunday, that I started to feel like I was contracting. They were pretty far apart, and definitely not Braxton Hicks, which is something I had previously, because any shift in movement or moving or anything like that, they didn't go, they were still there. And with the Braxton Hicks, every time I like changed my position or got up, they stopped. So I was like, right, okay, well, I'm obviously doing that, but I've heard that that can last for days. So again, don't get ahead of myself. This was my sort of mantra throughout it all. So I did that. We watched some TV, and then thought, right, as I am contracting, me and Pete were going to go and get an early night. So this is probably about 9 o'clock at that point, 7:30, 9 o'clock. Got ourselves ready for bed. We sort of had a brief chat and then turned off the light. And I was laying there and I was contracting, and I was like, this is uncomfortable. I'm not going to be able to just lay here and do this. I'm going to have to move. So at 10, after I'd got out of bed and was just sort of kneeling by the bed for a bit on the pregnancy ball, I was like, right, now I'm just going to have to go downstairs. So at 10 o'clock I left our bedroom, having not slept at that point, to go down to the lounge where I could make as much noise and do as much movement as I wanted, essentially. So that's what I did. And I thought, I can snooze on the sofa and then I can get up and move if I need to. So for the first, this is where all concept of time goes out the window, but for the first part of it I did sit on the sofa, where I sort of was sort of semi-upright with a cushion wedged underneath me so I could try and snooze, but also feeling a little bit crappy, and the dog was next to me. So we did that. I then realised that sleep wasn't gonna be a thing and that I had to get up, I had to move. So I'd been on and off snoozing, on and off reading my book at that point, but it got to a stage where I was like, nope, we need to pace. So every time I had a contraction, which at that point was probably, I don't know, 7 minutes apart or whatever, I paced up and down our lounge during the contraction, doing my breathing, you know, the in through the nose slowly and then out through the mouth to keep it calm. And then in the sort of down period, shall we call them, I had a Kindle on the top of the sofa. I leant on the sofa like that with my legs slightly sort of like hip wide apart, and I swayed and I just read the however many pages of the book that I could read, and then the next one would come and I would pace up and down and breathe. And that went on for hours and hours, and eventually I got too uncomfortable standing. I tried using a cushion and kneeling and leaning on the arm of the sofa, but that didn't last very long. I tried sitting on my office chair and sort of leaning on my desk so that I could like have a bit of a rest and then have it sort of tilted out so that as soon as the contraction came I could shoot up and walk again. I found that just sitting and contracting was painful. I had to move, I had to be upright. Pete came down at about 2 in the morning just to see how I was doing. At that point I think I was about 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes apart, maybe even closer. I was like, right, when we get to 3 I'll let you know and we'll probably need to head off to the hospital. And pretty much as soon as I said that to him, they then got really far apart again, but more painful, more forceful. So I was like, well, there's no point, I better just keep doing what I'm doing. They'll soon get closer together again. When they get to like 3 minutes apart, I'll let them know and we'll go. It was at 5 o'clock I messaged Pete saying, these are pretty intense now. That was the point that I was starting to make noise while I was going through it, and I was like, right, this is getting there now. I'm getting close to a point where I think I need some help, kind of thing. I need to go into hospital. They were probably again about 4 minutes apart at that point. Pete didn't see that message for another hour, so I did that for an hour, and then he came down at 6, and I was like, yeah, this is getting pretty tough. I think we might need to ring up and go to hospital, even though I'm not quite at the time in between contractions that they suggest. but just me breathing is not helping at the moment. So again, that's when we then rang at triage. I'm gonna pause because my child is making some noises. I want to just make sure that she's not awake, and also my memory card's dying, so bear with me. Right, apologies if anything has changed. But someone woke up, didn't they? So we had to have some milk. But yeah, so where were we? 6 o'clock on Monday. Pete came down. I told him that things were getting a bit tougher. So he rang the triage line again to explain what was going on, and they obviously said to come in. So again, that call, and then probably a half hour where did he have a shower? I don't think he had a shower, but he got dressed. I obviously got dressed because I was in an hoodie and like pyjama bottoms. I have to tell you though, the hoodie is like the best thing I wore for that, because it was warm enough but like loose enough, and there was enough movement in it, and it was snug enough and all of that stuff. I am very grateful to the hoodie. I'm very grateful to the book because it distracted me as well. So those were my two like good things in labouring at home basically. But we did that and then knocked on the door in the room that my mum was staying in, just to be like, yeah, we're going into hospital now, see you in a bit kind of thing. So yeah, so we probably got to hospital just before 7 in the morning. Managed to time it to not get into rush hour, so that was good. Again, obviously they have to do all the checks and things like that. Lots of different tests, monitoring and stuff, and obviously she did do an internal exam on me where I was 4 centimetres at that point, which, if I'm honest, I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping I was going to be further along. But 4 centimetres is where I had to be for them to admit me to the labour ward, the labour suite. So I was part of the midwifery-led unit. They asked me in the sort of admittance part, the consultation bit before you're allowed in properly, what my birth preference were, what kind of pain relief I was after, because if I wanted an epidural then they probably would have had to do that sooner, but I said I wanted to see how I get on and then try some gas and air. We'll just sort of play it by ear. Do you want some more milk? No? Oh, I just dropped it on the penguin. Want some more? Yeah. They also then asked whether I wanted a birth pool or not, and I said preferably yes. Don't think you do want this, do you? Not yet. Maybe again. Maybe again. So I said preferably yes. So then obviously she went off to see, you know, what they could do, and when they came back, turned out I could have the pool. Excuse you. But it was like the last room, and then they apologised because there's building works going on and things like that. So we were taken down there, introduced to our midwife. It takes a while, just to say, it takes a while for them to set you up in a room and fill a pool. So I did have to pace about a bit, and I was obviously contracting at that point. I very much tried to ignore things. Obviously I answered questions where needed and things like that, but largely I tried to stay very in me and what was happening here, and I just was breathing and walking. Breathing and walking was my main thing early on. So as I said, by the time all of that was done, it did feel like it took a very long time. It may not have done. All concept of time sort of went out the window, particularly at this point. Like, I think the first part, the initial like checks and stuff, took an hour, but I don't know. And then it felt like another good half hour, maybe even longer, for them to set everything up in the room and have the pool ready and all of that kind of stuff. But eventually it was, and I got in there. For anyone ever wondering what to wear in birth pools and stuff, I chose just to go in a black bra, like a bralette kind of thing. I don't know why, I just felt like... Is that right, Eloise? I felt like I wanted some sort of dignity, so I wore a bra, despite the fact everything else is on show, and quite frankly, in birth, your body is not really yours, and lots of people will look at it and prod it and do all sorts of stuff. But that's what I chose to wear. It does mean that the picture that you saw in the thumbnail can be used because I'm covered. That wasn't the whole point of it, but that's good. The pool had to be no more than, I think it was 37.5 degrees, which is lovely when you first get into it, but it does get cooler, but you can then top it up as long as you don't go over that temperature. And yeah, I was just floating around in there for a while. I found that a lot of my contraction pain was in my stomach to begin with, like around the belly area obviously, so I found that every time I got a contraction I then moved to lean on the step of the pool with my sort of arms up and then my knees on the bottom of the pool, just to get in that sort of position. The midwife said that was a good position to be in. It was just one that sort of naturally felt right for me, and then when the contraction stopped I then went back to sort of sitting and lounging as you would normally in a pool. I will insert now sort of the little video that Pete took of the room. He was very impressed by it. I was, you know, a bit preoccupied, but as you can see it's very spacious. They obviously have a bed as well if you want what they would call as a land berth rather than a water berth. We largely spent our time at the other end with the pool, and Pete had his own sort of chair and footstool and stuff, and we had our bags there and things. And then the midwife left the room, came back every 15 minutes to check her heart rate, and I never felt like they intruded. Occasionally it was a bit like, this is irritating now, I had to keep essentially sitting up so that they could get to my belly. They can do it in the pool, but she was in a slightly awkward position to get to, so I had to keep not getting out but just sort of raising myself onto the steps so that they could get to her with the, is it the Doppler, is that what it's called? But as I said, they can do it in water, so you don't actually have to move. And we did that. Pete worked out that you could Bluetooth to the pool. There were speakers, I think, underneath the pool. So we put on my Disney piano music because that's what I use often here to relax. And also when you're contracting and you've got piano music to say, I don't know, A Whole New World or something from Beauty and the Beast, I could then essentially sing the song in my head while I was doing the contraction as another distraction technique. And we did that for a while. I think it was about 11:30 I then had my next internal assessment, so I had to get out of the pool for that, which is cold. I was very glad to have my dressing gown and my slippers, so I did that. I had to be helped out obviously, and then made my way over to the bed so that they could do the internal assessment. And at that point I was 5, very, very close to 6 centimetres, which again I was pretty disappointed with. I was like, I've gone through this for hours and I am only here. Surely I should be further than this by now. But hey ho, that's where we were. I also took that opportunity to then go to the toilet, which you may not need to know, but if you're weeing they want you to essentially do it in a bedpan so that they can measure how much you're compared to what you're taking in and things, so that you don't get dehydrated, I guess. On that though, I didn't drink really. I had a few sips of water. I had a kids smoothie, which was a good shout, that one. Bit of sugar, that kind of stuff. And I had 1 Pringle. That's all I ate for the entirety of my labour, which I don't know whether, I just didn't want to. I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to eat. I just was sort of stuck in the cycle of, here's a contraction, now I stop. Here's a contraction, now I stop. But yeah, that's how I felt with like food and stuff. I then managed to get back in the pool again, which was lovely. At that point, the midwife I did have was going. It wasn't really a shift changeover, it's just that she was able to finish a bit earlier, so she went, another midwife came in, which, thinking about it, could have really thrown me, because you get used to the woman that you're well, the midwife, I shouldn't say woman because they're not all women, but predominantly, but you get used to the midwife that you're with, and obviously you're quite vulnerable in birth. So for them, oh, excuse you, then for someone else to come in and take over, yeah, could be quite off-putting, but to be frank, yeah, I just, right, you know, you're gonna look at me now, okay, sure. Let's do this then. So as I said, that was probably about midday, 11:30 midday that all happened, and then we went back to what we were doing. But I felt that the pain, and I know I've said it a few times, but this really is where concept of time flew out of the window. I actually have no idea how long this bit happened. Obviously not long because she was born at like 2 o'clock. But it felt almost immediately that I felt like the new midwife checked me like twice. That would have been like half an hour, and then she left. And in that 15 minutes, I was like, Pete, I really feel like I'd sort of complained that the pain had moved to my back, which is a lot harder than when I struggled with the back, and that's when I got hooked up to the gas and air to help with that pain, because yeah, the water really, really helps, but when it moved to my back, even the water wasn't cutting that pain. Like it was more difficult to then like breathe through it. I found myself getting more stressed about it, and like, I mean, Pete was great, he sort of helped me through it. I mean, it sounds irritating, but he just kept saying the word breathe at me, which made my brain go, oh yeah, breathe, which I needed. It sounds irritating, but it really wasn't. So that's when I got moved on to gas and air, and again, it feels like she did that, she did the test, and then within the next 15 minutes, or in that next 15 minutes, I was like, Pete, I really feel like I need to push. And I started groaning, mooing, that kind of thing at that point with the contractions. So the next time she came in, Pete was like, she said that she feels like she needs to push. I then had a contraction, obviously made the involuntary noise that comes out with that bit. Yeah, I did. And she was like, right, okay. So she was there for most of that, she's checking it. And again, to me, this feels like a split second, but it could have been hours, it could have been minutes. I have no idea. But she then, you know, checked her heartbeat again. I'd been going through this cycle a bit more often, and I was starting to not be able to like maneuver myself up so that she could check the heartbeat and things. I was like spent in between the contractions, and they were a lot closer together. It felt almost relentless. I was like, I just feel like this is continuous, like there is no break. Eventually, and again, as I said, I don't know the timing of this, she checked her heartbeat. Now, I didn't know that there was anything going on, but Pete was saying that he'd obviously been paying attention to it, and for all of the other ones, Eloise's heartbeat was, you know, 120, 130, which is normal. They were fine with that. Sounds high for us, but for a baby. But then when she did the next one, it was down to like 70, 60, something like that. So they told me that the baby's heartbeat had dropped, and I had to get out of the pool because they had to get her out, essentially. And I did not want to get out of that pool. I was like, don't make me get out of the pool. And they're like, no, we have to, come on, let's get out of the pool. So again, they helped me. And I said it was cold before, but when I got out this time, and also with everything that had been going on, and the fact that I was pretty much contracting what felt like every minute, but it again probably wasn't, I essentially just shook the whole time. I don't even think, no, they didn't, I just went in my bra and nothing else to the bed that time. I didn't get anything to cover me up. I was just so cold. It felt like the world and his dog then came into the room. It probably wasn't that many people, but it felt like a lot. And one of those was the consultant or the doctor or whatever their job title is, who was like, right, we're going to need to use the ventouse, which is the suction cup. So they would put suction cup to Eloise's head to help guide her out. That, fine. They were like, right, to do that, we're going to have to give you the episiotomy, essentially cut you. I was like, oh no, I don't want that. I do not want that. And they were like, but we have to get baby out. Like, she needs to come out. We'll give you what, if you can show us that you can, essentially, I don't actually know the wording, but essentially it was, if you can show us that you can give us a really good push in this next contraction, we'll hold off for a little bit. And I'm sure if Pete gave an account of this story, his would be a lot more accurate and probably slightly different to mine, but this is how my brain was working. So I was like, right, okay. I also believe I wasn't allowed gas and air, or I wasn't allowed it while I was contracting, but I could afterwards, but basically I didn't. So poor Pete probably broke his fingers. I essentially grabbed hold of his hand, my feet had like blocks to push against, and I tried to use all my might to push, and they were like, great, we're gonna try and catheterize your bladder. So there seemed to be a whole heap of like stuff being injected and stuff up there, which again I'm not really aware of. I just knew that there was some pain happening around that. And then the next contraction happened, same thing. In that one, the doctor, the consultant, the person that wasn't the midwife, did tell me off slightly, saying no, the energy needs to go down below, not into your throat. That helped, I guess. That gave me a focus. Probably the third one was when her head started to appear. That hurts. There's a reason why they call that the Ring of Fire. So we managed that, and then obviously she came out, got put on me. I have to admit that it took me a good few minutes to actually realise what the hell had happened, and that there was a baby and all of that kind of stuff. She got put on me, she then started crying, and I was like, oh, there's a baby, kind of thing. And said hello and all of that kind of stuff. But I was so dazed and so out of it that, to be honest, initially I was not aware, which I know sounds a bit stupid, but that is the case. It was. I wasn't actually quite aware that you'd arrived. I had a small tear, so they did have to stitch me up. It's uncomfortable. It's not fun, but it's fine. Rather that than the bigger tear that would have happened if we'd had the ventouse, little babes. And then you would have had a very weird shaped head, which would have gone back down, but you would have had a weird shaped head to begin with. So she was obviously bundled up onto me. They asked about whether I wanted the injection for my placenta. I said, go ahead. The thing I am disappointed with, so obviously they gave me the injection. I was jumping ahead there, sorry. My placenta seemed to come almost immediately. I didn't really notice it, to be honest. That bit's the easy bit. You're the harder bit to get out. But what I was slightly disappointed with is one of the main things I wanted was to have the delayed cord clamping so that she could get as much of the blood from the placenta as possible. And I don't think that happened, which I'm disappointed with, because it's something I'd said very early on. They were like, yeah, we'll do it. And I think if it was the midwife, and if I had delivered just with the midwife, that probably would have happened, but because there was all the other people in and I was hooked up to the monitoring machines and all of that kind of stuff, the doctor consultant, I really can't remember what her role was. I think she only got like 30 seconds rather than 3 minutes or whatever. So I am disappointed with that, but you don't seem to have suffered too much with it. They then give you an awful lot of time to stay in the room, which surprised me. I knew we'd have at least an hour, but she was born around 2, and we weren't transferred to the ward, you know, the generic hospital ward, until at least 6 o'clock, maybe a little earlier, but yeah, probably around 6 o'clock. So we had a lot of time. Certainly we had a good hour just of her on my chest. Then the midwives came back. They gave her vitamin K injection. They helped me off the bed and into the shower and things. And while I was doing all of that, Pete had his skin-to-skin time with her. It wasn't until probably a good 2 or so hours that we actually rang my mum to say that she was here, and that visiting hours ended at 8 o'clock if she wanted to come up. So my mum basically came straight away, got her in a taxi, And then Pete needed to put some more money on the car anyway, so he went to meet her after I'd been transferred to the ward. I've mentioned it, so obviously we got moved to a 4-bed ward. I did have to stay the night because this little one arrived over 24 hours after my waters broke, so she had to have some tests for like infection, make sure nothing was going on, which ended at like 2 in the morning because it was 12 hours. So I did have to stay, which I wasn't very happy about, but I'll talk about the whole hospital stay in a different video because this one is just about birth. I hope I've actually covered everything. I'm aware this is probably going to be a very long story time, but there's quite a lot to cover in it. I had a positive birth. Obviously the end didn't quite go the way I hoped because I would have liked to have stayed in the pool and given birth in the pool rather than on a bed. I personally did find it much more painful not being in water, so the pool really did help me and did mean I didn't have to have any kind of pain relief until right towards the end when I started to feel the need to push, and as I said, the pain went into my back. That's when I got hooked up to the gas and air, which I'm not entirely sure works, but it's a placebo even if it doesn't. I was worried that it would make me feel sick. I never was sick, but there were several moments throughout the whole thing, not just with the gas and air, where I thought I might be, but I never was. It all went relatively well. My stubbornness probably played an awful big part in how she arrived and how I coped with it, to be quite frank, because there was no way I was going to let them cut me, and I tried to go mind over matter. We've just got to get through this contraction kind of thing. And I'm sure they say it to lots of women and stuff, although maybe not all women, but they kept being like, I can never tell when you're having a contraction because you're so calm with everything. But we did it, you're here. She is currently 5 weeks old, thriving, suffering from a bit of baby acne at the moment, but you're doing well. We're getting used to everything, aren't we? So as I said, this has probably just been a very long rambly video. I do apologise if I haven't covered stuff. If you do have any questions, do put them in the box below. If you are interested in any other topics around pregnancy, birth, this period of time, again, put them in the section below. I am going to do a video at some point about how I found the first period of your life, because there are some things that I want to talk about on that, but that won't be coming for a little while. I think the 4th trimester technically is the first 3 months. I don't know whether I'll wait for the first 3 months, but I'll certainly wait for a little bit longer until we film that one. So if you are interested in that, click the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one, won't we, Eloise? Bye.